Hi, and welcome back to another episode of Expat Lens. I'm your host, Jack Xavier. Today, my guest and I cover a wide range of topics from Japanese law enforcement to the bizarre world of vending machines. As always, we also discuss identity and find out how it is very easy to be a devoted Muslim in Japan. Stick around to find out more and take a look through the Expat Lens. Hello and welcome back to another episode of Expat Lens. My guest today is one of the aforementioned people who walk between two worlds since birth. He is an American with roots in both the Middle East and South America. He is the mind behind two successful podcasts concerning identity and the international experience in Japan. So I know we can learn a lot from him and his insights today. A wonderfully patient and thoughtful fellow, it brings me great pleasure to welcome this new friend, Ramsey. Thanks for coming on the podcast.
Those are very kind words of you, especially it's a bit of a stretch for, say, successful podcast. I'd like to think it was successful in my heart.
It was successful if you ask me. Just looking at the content that you produced, it was very, very interesting. So if you want to jump into it from there, do you want to talk about your previous projects? Do a little plug to start things off?
Honestly, they were just like some passion projects that I had. I've always had an idea that I enjoy talking with people and I enjoy getting kind of their perspectives on different things. I think everyone has a story to tell, and I think me being mixed, as you mentioned, I'm half Colombian and half Algerian, but born and raised in the U.S. So I always had this idea of like, I want to speak to other people who are mixed and had this experience growing up. And so I made a podcast called Blurred Lines, and when I was in Temple University here in Tokyo, there was a lot of other people who were mixed, and people who are half Japanese, half Thai, half Indian, half Japanese, African American, but born and raised in Japan, and all these little topics were really interesting to cover. So I just kind of spoke about their perspectives. That was a nice podcast, but it ended really quickly because I was doing it by myself and I was just recording off my phone. Then I had a friend who approached me and he said like, "Oh yeah, I really like what you're doing with your podcast. I've always wanted to do something like that." So we did something. Yeah, it was a podcast called Brokios, and just like two bros in Tokyo, basically. So just me and him. We went through many different iterations of that podcast, but eventually came to the focus of introducing different backgrounds who are living in Tokyo. I think it's all too common that you find people who have just English teacher or recruiter or these kinds of jobs, but you don't really hear a lot of stories of other types of people who have other kinds of interesting jobs. So I wanted to introduce different people. So I had the same friend from the previous podcast, African American, but born and raised in Japan. Then I had another guy who was like half Nigerian and half Japanese, and he's a model. Another friend who was like half American, half Japanese, but he's into crypto. There was another girl who was like the organizer of the Tokyo Black Lives Matter protest. We had her on my podcast. We had a Terrace House member on my podcast. So things were picking up really well for that podcast, and we were kind of getting things moving along, and we had some interesting conversations, but unfortunately that ended a little early.
Well, maybe we can say that it's just on hiatus if you're perhaps going back into that realm later on.
I think both those podcasts are probably done for, but that doesn't mean that I'm retired. I am on hiatus, but I'm not retired.
Gotcha. So. There's still work to be done. Yeah. Just diving a little bit deeper into you gave us quite an interesting preview of some of the folks that you've spoken to so far. Was there one thing that stands out to you about the complexities of identity when you talk to all of these different people? Did you see any kind of through lines, or was it really everyone is different in their unique way, and this person was interesting for this person was interesting for that? Or did you see something that kind of united all of these folks who are different but share this kind of common aspect of being more than?
Yeah, I think it's something that's becoming a lot more common these days. The world has become a lot more globalized, so you're seeing a lot more international couples, international families mixed. And so it's a very interesting topic to cover with, especially within the past, 20, 30 years, with the globalization going on. And before, I felt like it was, at least from my own understanding, you only really saw this happening on a larger scale in America. Because America was a melting pot, and everyone goes over there, they have their different backgrounds. But I think now, I've been living in Japan for about 4 or 5 years now, and you see that more and more mixed families are starting to pop up. It's not super common. It's a very homogenous country Japan is. But at the same time, like I have so many friends who are mixed. I would say everyone has shared difficulties, but it doesn't mean that it's all the same. But I think when we unite and we're able to come together and speak about these, like, oh yeah, like I've experienced something just like that or similar to that, or I feel the same way, or like, oh, I understand where you're coming from, but maybe like I went about it in a different way. So it's kind of like everyone has shared experiences, especially in Japan, being a foreigner and being mixed, but it doesn't mean it's all the same.
Do you have a specific example, perhaps something that a guest spoke to you about, or maybe your own personal experience that you found like, yeah, other expats have definitely experienced this, or other people in the international community have definitely experienced that, and we've connected on it?
I think probably the most obvious thing. I mean, it's really different because like you have foreigners in Japan, and you like some foreigners are people who are expats who moved over here. Some are hafu who like born and raised over here and can speak the language, and males and females kind of have different experiences in that regard as well. For example, like as a male, like I've been stopped by police multiple times in Japan.
Haven't we all, though?
Yeah.
What was your experience like when you were stopped by police? Was there a specific reason? Were you walking while gaijin? Was that the reason?
I will tell you, so in America, I think I've hardly ever been stopped by police. I have been a few times, maybe like skateboarding around while it's late at night, or maybe just hanging out in my car in a parking lot when it was at a park. But it was only like a couple times at most, and out of like 21 years of me living there. And then but I've been stopped here multiple times in the past 4 or 5 years. I've probably been stopped about like maybe at least 10 times by police. But the only difference is I never felt like my life was in danger here. In America, you always feel kind of like nervous about like, oh, what's going to happen? What is this encounter going to lead to? You hear so many things. I mean, of course, there's nice cops, but at the same time, you feel that worriedness, But in Japan, like, maybe you're getting stopped for no reason. Maybe I'm getting stopped for walking while gaijin. But at the same time, I never felt like my life was threatened. So in that sense, I feel more comfortable in this country. And, like, safe, Regardless if I get stopped by another person or if I got stopped by police or whoever. Like, there's never any worries about that.
There's definitely that feeling of safety. Everyone talks about it in Japan, right? Even those who have only been here for a couple of weeks or just traveling on vacation. And Japan is known as this safe country. In regards to being stopped by the police, yeah, like I've been stopped many, many times.
Oh, yeah?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Last time it happened was about a year ago.
Oh, yeah?
And it's funny that you should say that you don't feel like your life is in danger. You certainly don't. In fact, I got mad at the cop and like I told him such. Yeah. Because it's like, what are you stopping me for? What's the reason? And his excuse was kind of hilarious. He said, well, I haven't seen your face in the neighborhood here before. And I'm like, oh, really? What about that lady over there? What about that old guy? Do you know them by name? But at the same time, I think we do need to keep an open mind in terms of what the police are looking for. Japan's police are sort of not that busy.
Yeah, they have nothing going on, man.
Right? So, they do their little patrol. They walk the beat, and they're like, oh, there's a foreigner. Let's see if their papers are in order. It feels very weird to have it happen to you, but if it does happen, all you got to do, take your card out, take your passport out, show them that. If you speak a little Japanese, speak Japanese, it makes the process easier. They write some stuff down, and they let you go. Like, that's been my experience the entire time. What about yourself? How has it gone for you?
I've been stopped in a couple different places. I've been stopped in Hiro after I got off work. I was working at a restaurant at the time, and Hiro was like a very international area where there's a bunch of embassies and expats living there.
That's very bizarre. I'm surprised to hear that.
Yeah, it's kind of a silly story. I was just like at a stoplight, and I was about to cross the walk, and then I see 2 cops standing next to me, and I like quickly look. I just look over there, and then I look away. Like nothing like kind of nervous glance or anything. Just kind of looked, and then like looked away, and then they looked at each other, and then they looked at me, and then they come and walk up to me.
Oh my gosh.
And then they searched my backpack.
No.
Yeah, and then they had like a little pouch. Like there was a little pouch inside my backpack.
Yeah.
And it said Blade on it.
Okay.
Like, what is this? I'm like, it's a nail clipper set. It's like, open it. I'm like, okay. So I opened it and showed them nail clippers.
Yeah.
Another time I got stopped in Roppongi just for walking. I had just also gotten off work again, working in Eikaiwa at the time. And and I just like was walking down the stairs. These 2 cops saw me in Roppongi. I was not drunk. I was just walking. Yeah, and that was kind of stupid. But the thing is, like, do you know that song, Ue Muite Aru Ko?
Sure, yeah, it's the really famous one.
At that time, I was in a really good mood,
Mhm.
and I was listening to that song in that exact moment.
Wow.
And the Japanese guy's like asked me like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like, "Oh, I just got off work." And I was like, "I'm listening to this song," and I was like in a really happy mood.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I'm like, and they just started laughing. They let me go.
That's awesome.
I was like, but at the same time, like I left and I was still pissed. I was like, "Why are you stopping me?" You know, I was in such a good mood. Like I just didn't want to ruin like my mood at the time, so I just like smiled and showed them like, ah, ha, ha, ha.
Yeah, it can be very jarring, for sure, to be stopped by the police for seemingly no reason. But I think your perspective is definitely the way that you need to go with it. Don't let it break your mood.
Yeah,
You're not in any danger.
Japan is a great country, and there's so many great things about it. And I think no matter what country you go to, there's always gonna be something negative and something positive. And it's just about what do you feel comfortable dealing with. To me, I'd rather be stopped more but feel safe at the same time than be stopped every once in a while in America and feel like, oh, there's a potential something could happen, you know?
Sure.
If I'm angry or if I feel like if I raise my voice a little bit or something like that, you know?
Right. The barrier between things escalating is a lot thicker in Japan than it is in the United States, perhaps.
But I mean, I have no problem with myself. I feel like I'm a pretty relatively patient person, so I don't think I would have any problem in America. But still, like that feeling's still always there.
Let's spend a little bit more time in this realm of negatives versus positives when you go to any country, right? What would you say? You know what? Let's start with the negatives first, and we'll end on a nice note. What would you say the negatives are for coming to Japan? And you know what? Let's add another layer on top of that. How do you relate this to before you came to Japan and after you came to Japan? So like things that you imagined Japan was like, and you're like, oh, actually that was not true, or that was true, but here's my asterisk that goes along with that.
To be honest, I kind of already had an idea as to what Japan was before I officially moved here.
How did that come about?
Yeah, so the first time I came to Japan was like literally the same year I graduated from high school. I came here for 5 days with my mom and my sister. My mom was working for Delta at the time, so I could come. We came over here just kind of like on a whim. And,
sure. On those non-rev tickets, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was nice. So we did that, and we came here for 5 days, and it was nice. I acted like the tour guide, but I had no idea what I was doing. And but then I was like, I wanted to come back again. So I came back the following year. I came here for 2 weeks by myself, and I became very close with a Japanese family over here who I'm still very close with. The following year, I came back again for a month with some friends this time. The following year after that, I moved here for university. And
Temple, as you mentioned.
Yeah,
right?
Temple University. And then I was here for about a year. And then I went back home for the summer and then like had some documentation problems and I wasn't able to come back. So my visa got canceled and then I had to reapply for the visa again. So I came back a year and a half later. So I was here for a year. I went back to the States for a year and a half and then I came back to Japan. And now it's been like 4 years since I came back the second time. So, I mean, I've had a pretty decent idea of what Japan was before I officially moved here.
Bits and pieces, picking it up from a young age.
Of course, it's a big country and there's a lot of intricacies and you know, and my of course, my perception has changed over time, but marginally, you know, like because I already had an idea, you know,
and that image was positive to begin with.
Yeah. I think everyone, like, if you're a foreigner, if you're a young foreigner living in the States. And you always have this impression of Japan as kind of like entertainment and technology and like very fun place to go, you know, food and just culture and all these kinds of things. So that doesn't really change completely. Of course, the perspective of what good technology is or futuristic technology is kind of changes.
Sure.
You know, in a country that still uses fax machines and
right, that's the one that everyone brings up, right?
Yeah, exactly. So, but I mean, and flip phones and all these kinds of things. But I think a lot of the technology that's in Japan is molded to be more innovative and convenient in our everyday lives. You know.
The convenience factor is definitely at the forefront of pretty much everything in Japan, I feel like. Customer service to an extreme. The stuff that you can buy at the convenience store or do at the convenience store is next level.
Yeah.
You can do your taxes there, folks. Wow. What do you know? Pay your electricity. It's crazy.
You have a print machine over the nearest convenience store, which is literally only a minute walk from your house, Especially the vending machines, too. You can find them any and everywhere. And
I'm a big fan of vending machines. I always get excited when I see unique ones. There's one on the street that is a meat vending machine.
Wow.
It's like frozen meat, I suppose. And it's outside of I guess it's a restaurant.
Yeah.
I've always been very curious. Haven't bought anything from it yet.
You should do it.
I want to. There was another one that I was eyeing for a long time. I finally did buy something from it. It's frozen gyoza or like dumplings.
Yeah.
I was like, how good could it be? But it was actually very good.
Really?
So yeah, it's a fun little thing about Japan. Wacky vending machines. Every time I just get so excited about it.
There actually used to be in front, like not maybe like a 5-minute walk from my house. So it's kind of like a residential area.
Sure.
So like a 5-minute walk from my house, there was a vending machine with turtle soup.
Excuse me?
Yeah, only turtle soup. Like turtle soup and fish broth.
Wow.
And it was like right in front of someone's house. And I was like, what the heck? And I really wish I would have bought something from it, but I never did. And then by the time I thought I was actually thinking about doing it,
disappeared.
It disappeared.
Yeah. That is something that you do see every once in a while. Like people will manage their own unique little vending machines. This is going really deep into the vending machine rabbit hole, but I might as well mention it because I think it's so funny. There's this corner, not quite in Akihabara. If you're familiar with the area, going towards Kanda, there's a place called Manseibashi is the name of the bridge. You go over that bridge and you take a left along the river. And right on that corner, there is this dilapidated shack of a building that's full of insane vending machines.
Oh.
Weird stuff like plastic bugs, canned bread. There's one, I've never tried it because they're expensive and I have no idea what's inside. But the wrapping is paper and there's a bunch of stuff written on the paper. I think it's taken from like books or something. And you pay like 1,200 yen or like 2,000 yen for this mystery box with weird writing on it. And I never thought, you know what, I'll just throw away 2,000 yen, who cares?
Yeah.
But go in there and check it out because it's super duper weird and you can have a laugh. They also sell popcorn there. Like there's a popcorn machine. Just throwing it out there.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of weird vending machines. I think we kind of veered off the topic of something negative about Japan, but we kind of veered into something quite positive.
Hey, you know what? That's fine. We don't have to talk about the negative if you don't want to.
I mean, I think I don't really have anything negative to say per se. I mean, I guess the cop thing was kind of a negative thing in and of itself, but
weird silver lining negative thing, right? It's like it's not good, but also it's
whatever.
Not that bad.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about your history with Japan. So you got here the first time you visited, you were a teenager. Was that your first brush with the country, or had you known about Japan before? Were you like a fan of pop culture and such?
I've been a fan of anime since I was a kid. So,
hey man, haven't we all?
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
What was your introductory drug to the Japanese pop experience?
I mean, it was probably either Pokemon or Dragon Ball Z. So I don't know. It's one of those. The first one that I became very invested in was Naruto.
Oh yeah.
And then, but now for me, like I'm a big fan of One Piece. So besides that, I mean, like I don't like center my life around the entertainment aspect of Japan per se. I think Japan is a lot more complex than just that.
Of course.
Yeah. I think another thing that kind of drew me here was also the martial arts as well.
That's right. You're a martial artist. What did you get your start in?
I mean, of course, when I was a kid, like in elementary school, I did karate. Karate. And then after that, I watched a lot of like movies with like I don't know if you ever heard of Ong Bak. So I got into like Muay Thai.
I remember that guy. Yeah. There's one where he like has to rescue an elephant or something.
Yeah,
dude. Those movies were awesome.
And I saw those movies as like Muay Thai. That's my thing. I want to get into that. So I found my nearest gym and I got into Muay Thai. And the guy over there was like, "We have jiu-jitsu too. You want to try it?" I looked over there. I looked at the other side of the gym. I was like, "That looks stupid." And then I tried it, and then that's the only thing that I ever do.
Nice.
So now, I've been doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for about 10 years now. It's a big part of my life, and I think the culture here in Japan that focuses on martial arts is very great. The gym that I go to, they have a very international vibe, so it kind of keeps me very interested in staying in Japan for a long time. One of the things, at the very least.
Cool. Let's actually go from there, because I did want to ask you, where do you see yourself in the future? Is it in Japan? Do you think, yes, I'm definitely going to make this place my home moving forward, or?
Yeah, that's kind of evolved over time, to be honest. I think when I first came here originally, I was like, oh, I just want to visit a couple times. Oh, I just want to, finish my, I'll just finish my university. I'll come here for a semester. And then it was like, oh, now I'll just leave after graduation. And then it became like, oh, maybe I'll just stay here for another year or two, just, get some work experience, teach English, and then go back. It just quickly, like, became something like, now it's to the point where, like, I didn't think I was ever going to want to stay here for, like, long term or for the rest of my life. It was always like, I'll stay here for one more year, or maybe 3 more years, maybe 5 more years, maybe 10,
Interesting.
And now it's to the point where I'm thinking, okay, maybe Japan can be my home base, Like, I'm thinking about, like, maybe potentially buying a house here, making Tokyo my home base, and then just maybe living in another country from time to time. But I mean, that's still just an idea for now. I love Japan, It's very, like we mentioned before, it's safe, it's convenient, it's great, has great food. You have your own communities. All these kinds of things makes Japan, pretty great.
Your story is very interesting, because I usually hear the opposite of that. I usually hear that someone was very interested in Japan outside of their country, then they come here and they realize it wasn't exactly what they expected. They stay for maybe a year, maybe 2 years, and then they leave somewhat disillusioned, I suppose I could say, something like that. But you were the opposite. You were kind of very, very flexible. Let's just give it a shot. And the more time you spent, the more you're like, this is where I belong. This is what's good for me. Have you thought about changing your nationality? Is that something?
No, definitely not. I don't have any plans on doing that. I mean, to be quite frank, like, my Japanese language capabilities are not that great. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that, like, I didn't think I was going to be here for that long. But now that I think I want to be here for longer, okay, now I think I want to focus more on improving my Japanese language. But I don't really have any plans on getting a Japanese citizenship, to be honest. I don't need it. I think as long as I can get a permanent residency, I'm fine with that, My wife is raised in Japan, not Japanese, but she's planning on getting her citizenship maybe within the next year or two.
I see. So then you can be the dependent visa. Like, it's very easy to get
so I can get a spousal visa from her, and then after that, I think after 3 years you can get a permanent residency based off of that.
I'm not sure about the timeline, but it's something like that.
Yeah. I think it's much quicker if you're married. So I mean, that's just like my idea in my head right now. Things might change, but
yeah, of course.
I don't have any plans on getting a Japanese citizenship, to be honest. I enjoy my privileges of being American citizen.
I kind of feel the same way. People have asked me that question a lot, and they're like, will you ever try to become Japanese? Mostly Japanese people have asked me, and I've never really seen the purpose of changing nationality. Being an American has its perks. Being Japanese has its perks, but there's a part of me that is undeniably American, and it's never going to change, and I don't really want to get rid of it either. I don't know. How do you feel about that? And actually, maybe let's go back to the identity thing, because this is sort of your wheelhouse.
I mean, when people ask me, like, what my identity is, like, I kind of, like, have grappled with that a lot growing up as a kid, Like I mentioned before, I grew up in a household where my mom is Algerian and my dad is Colombian, and the common language in the household was English. And I never was really able to kind of get super close with either side of the family. I mean, of course, I was very close to my mom's side, and I went to Algeria multiple times, but I've never been to Colombia. I didn't meet my half siblings, so it's my dad's children he had beforehand. I didn't meet them until I was much older, so I didn't really get a chance to speak Spanish growing up.
Okay.
I didn't get my mom didn't speak to me in French or Arabic, so I didn't really speak those languages. So when living in a country that is a huge melting pot, and you yourself are mixed, but you're not entirely attached to either one of those cultures, it's really difficult to find out how do you identify. And when you leave the States, the only thing that you can identify as to other people is as an American. And that's where I was raised. That's where I was born, and that's where I got all of my experiences and my values from, I guess. I don't necessarily agree with everything that some people would say in America. Like, I agree with some points on one side and some points on the other. I always had this mixed variation of what do I identify with, and I think what it always came back to, what do I identify with? What do I identify as? I always just say I'm Muslim.
We had a very long conversation the first time we met
Yeah.
about your relationship with Islam and identifying as Muslim.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a big part of my life, you know. And I've always held that belief in my heart. I mean, given that I grew up with it, but I would always kind of question it and doubt. I think it's important. Whatever you believe in, you always should question. You should always doubt. But every time I had asked those questions, I always got an answer back that made sense. Although I was never so involved with the Muslim community, whether it was in America or here, still I felt like this very closeness to what I believed was true. I feel like no matter where I go, whatever country I go to, whatever group I'm in, if I see another Muslim or I speak to another Muslim, it's just very easy to kind of connect with. I enjoy having those types of conversations and about religion.
You've said a lot of really interesting stuff here that I would like to pick up on a few of those. If we can go back a little bit to when you were talking about you're being raised in America and then you leave America and you have this projected image of yourself as an American, right? And then of course you have this very strong identity tie being Muslim as well. I've felt that I was more American after I left the United States because you're constantly reaffirming that when people say, hi, nice to meet you. Where are you from? You're like, oh, I'm from America. Then you end up taking certain, I don't know if I want to say stereotypes, but you end up taking certain ideals about your country or your proposed identity and then incorporating them a little bit stronger into your persona abroad than maybe you would in the States or your own home country. Do you have any thoughts or feelings about that? Does that ring true with you as well? Do you feel like you're more American now that you've left?
I wouldn't say more or less American. I can tell you the difference between me being in America versus being here and the change in how I identify with has nothing to do with my nationality, but more to do with my perspective on life.
Okay. What's changed?
So you know how, like, if you stay in a small town or if you know all the same people, like you go to one elementary school and then you go to the next, you go to middle school and you go to high school, you know everybody. You know everybody in like that you're growing up with. And it becomes kind of like an echo chamber. You hang out with the same people. They know who you are. Well, a lot of times what people end up doing is when they end up leaving their hometown, like for example, people go to college in another state or they'll go to college in another country and they'll start to realize that experimenting with themselves and realizing, okay, maybe I wasn't that person. Maybe I was acting with the expectations of what I thought other people expected of me.
Very interesting.
So it's like you're not doing something because you necessarily believe that or you are that, and you're not doing it because other people view you a certain way. You're doing it because you think that somebody else expects something from you.
Man, you just hit upon something really, really interesting that I think is very relevant in Japanese culture. This idea of you have to act a certain way because it's what is expected of you.
No, you think it's what expected of
right.
you.
Yeah, you think that it is, but is it actually?
Yeah.
And if you talk to folks and clarify things, it turns out that miscommunications are rampant in Japan, in Japanese, amongst Japanese people. It's very, very curious. And it's like one of these things about the culture that I don't hear people talk about that much, but you've actually brought it up outside the realm of Japan. I think that's really interesting. Maybe it's not just a Japanese thing.
Because like when I'm in America, okay, like I'm mixed, right? But like everyone wants to assume who I am. They always think especially when I was in college, I had a shaved head. It was easy to take care of. It was easy to wash and all these kinds of things. But I looked a lot more ethnically ambiguous because of that. And I think because of that, I'd have like Indian people come up to me, like, oh, you look like my nephew or like my cousin. I'd have black people say like, oh, you look like my nephew or, you know, my cousin or my cousin as well. You know, so I'm like, oh, or some people telling me like, oh, you look Spanish or you look Cuban or you look Italian or you look I've had people tell me here like, oh, I could pass off as half Japanese. I mean, I don't really think I look like that, but I think maybe when my beard was less and my head was shaved, I think I was a lot more ethnically ambiguous.
You look like one of those little high school baseball guys.
Yeah, I guess so. So I think because of that, I think people would project, like, for example, like if they assumed I was Hispanic, which I am, they would approach me and start speaking to me in Spanish. If people think I can speak Arabic, they'll approach me and speak to me in Arabic. So like people put this expectation of what they think that I am because that's what they are, you know? And so I feel like in America, I was always experiencing that. I was always experiencing that people thought I was a part of their group. And I kind of was a part of their group, you know? Like I am mixed, so I am Arab and I am Hispanic, but like I never felt a part of that because I couldn't speak the languages. And so I had these expectations of me when someone approaches me to speak that language, but I don't.
It's a double-edged sword. What you're telling me, my first impression is that it feels very empowering because it allows you to get your foot in the door with basically anybody, right? So you have this very unique opportunity to bridge this cultural or racial gap for seemingly all groups. Like that's an excellent power.
Yeah, it was great when you speak the language though.
Talking about languages for a second, how important do you think it is to speak the language? And we can say Japanese, Arabic, Spanish, anything really. Is this really the most important factor in getting close or getting deeper into the community, do you think?
Speaking the language? Yeah. There's a quote by Nelson Mandela. I don't know if you've ever heard of it before.
I know the one, but please repeat it.
It's basically like, if you speak to a man in his second language, you're speaking to his brain. And if you speak to a man in his native tongue, then you're speaking to his heart. When they see my face, they feel like maybe some type of like closeness or like, oh, they can identify with me. But then when I can't even speak to them in their language, and then I speak to them in American English like this, you know, it kind of sucks. And when I'm in Japan, I don't really have an expectation of being anything. So I can speak in English and I'm like, oh, I'm just an American. I think when you travel, expectations that are placed on you by other people, they change. And so you start to be more insightful as to who you are. And you start to realize, okay, I am not those expectations that I had by other people, but I'm something much deeper than that.
I'm really glad that you said that because this is one of the themes that I introduced in a previous episode. So like you saying that and echoing that sentiment really makes me feel good because it means we're on the same page and it means that we're onto something here. Yeah. Your comment just now I thought was also very interesting. You said being in Japan, you don't have to be anything. Okay, maybe I default to being an American or something like that. Then, and traveling changes you and et cetera, et cetera. In what way has your perspective on identity changed since you've come to Japan? And also, if I can preface that with a little bit more, like, have you lived in other countries other than the U.S. and Japan?
I've never lived in another country besides the U.S. and Japan. Okay. I've been to other countries, but I've never lived in other countries.
Okay, so let's just focus on Japan then. Has something changed about you and the way that you view yourself now that you're here? It's like, well, I'm more amorphous. I'm more able to mold myself to the situation, or maybe you've started to follow Islam a little bit more strictly, or...
I mean... a lot of things have changed, but a lot of things have not. So it's kind of like, I don't know. I think the core of who I am has not changed, but I think the actions and the thoughts that follow have changed.
What would you say is your guiding principle there then? Your core being the thing that's like that
Islam.
Hasn't changed. While we're on the topic, I'd like to ask you, like, what is your experience being Muslim in Japan? And if I could give a little anecdote, the first time we met was very interesting because we met at the station. You said, hey, do you mind if I go pray? Because it's time for me to pray. And we found in the tourist center, there was actually a prayer room. I was surprised. I'm like, wow, I didn't know that there was this kind of facility readily available.
To be honest, I was also a little bit surprised, to find that small little prayer room over there. And you'll be surprised you can find it in Harajuku and Shibuya and
most of the city center spots, right? Yeah.
It's really cool, like Shinjuku, there's mosques, around Tokyo. So
what I wanted to know was, are there any challenges that you've noticed when you say that you're Muslim in Japan? Like, what kind of a reaction do you get from either Japanese people or the international community? Like, you're part of it, everyone is usually very open, but like, what kind of reactions have you had? Has it always been positive? Has there been mostly curiosity? To reiterate, how do you feel Islam is viewed in Japan?
To answer the question, like the perception of Islam within Japan, I think when I tell people that I'm Muslim, I don't really get any reaction. They're just like, oh, okay. But the thing is, like, Japanese people, they don't really give you their first reaction or their actual thought.
Or they might not even know, actually.
Exactly. And the things that they know maybe have some kind of negative connotation to it. Japanese people are very polite, very kind, so they don't really say anything about it. At the same time, I'm not sure how curious they are about it, but I don't really receive many questions about it.
It's a fairly secular country, I think is the word we would use, right? Non-religious.
Yeah, for sure. It's secular at the same time and very heavily ingrained to be religious in a very superficial way. You know, like they go to the temples and they go to the shrines and they have the ceremonies and they go, and if they pass by a shrine, they'll bow. But they don't think anything about it past that, just to bring about some type of respect. But past that, it's not really thought about or practiced. But Islam is kind of the opposite. It's a very deep thing in the sense that people study it, people practice it within their everyday lives. They're constantly doing things to think about it. But yeah, I don't think Japanese people have any idea of what Islam is, and their only perception of Islam is what they see in the media and the news, but they don't have any real opinion about it because they don't know anything in depth about it, and they know they don't know anything in depth about it.
It's an outside thing, doesn't have anything to do with me.
Yeah.
Okay, whatever.
Yeah, basically. But I mean, if I tell some Japanese person I'm Muslim, they're like, okay.
Yeah,
cool.
very, very chill.
Yeah, I don't get anything negative from people, so that's nice.
That's reassuring to hear.
I don't know if you know this, but actually Islam is the fastest growing religion in Japan.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Wow, how did you find out about that? I mean, I guess you're in the community, but
yeah, I mean, I follow some like pages online, and I've seen a few different pages they've been saying the same thing, and even in news you can see it. It's like it's true, and it's not just from Muslims who are moving here, but it's also Japanese people who are converting.
Interesting. It's good to hear that you've had a very positive interaction in Japan with your faith. What's involved there? We're getting close to a time we can wrap up. I wanted to ask you a little bit about your experience of work in Japan before we close things down. First and foremost, what kind of jobs have you done in Japan, and what have your experiences been with each of those jobs?
Yeah, I mean, I've done a few different jobs here in Japan. When I was in university, I worked at a restaurant, and I was working in the kitchen, chopping vegetables and meat. I did that for about like maybe a year and a half, maybe 2 years. I've done some other side jobs as well. I did some voice acting things.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
That's nice.
Yeah, it was cool. I mean, this was like side jobs. It was from time to time.
Gigs here and there.
Yeah.
What was your experience with the voice acting?
It was cool. The voice acting thing, they were super random. I had a share house mate he's Japanese and was involved in that world. One day he just approaches me in the living room and says, "Ramsey, I want to borrow your voice." So he records my voice. He says, "Read this." And so I read it into this microphone, and this is all right. Thanks. Basically, just like,
no explanation.
No,
he just steals your voice.
No, he gives an explanation. He says like, "Oh, we're doing this commercial for my company. We want you to audition." So I auditioned against some other professional voice actors who actually do this for their living.
Wow.
And I got the job.
Wow.
All of them.
Nice.
It was for SoftBank.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
What? It was an animation? Like, what was the voice
It was like
acting?
a monologue thing.
Okay.
It was like a minute and a half, or maybe 2 minutes.
Wow. Okay.
It's on YouTube. You can probably find it.
Okay. Is it like a service explanation or a commercial?
It was just kind of like, oh, we're getting more involved with AI and futuristic.
Cool. So this was kind of recent, actually.
This was maybe like 3 years ago. It's not that recent. Did some other things, like I did a commercial. I was a background character for Suzuki Solio. I did like a bunch of like random jobs like that from time to time. But the main things that I did was like that job working in a kitchen in a restaurant. I worked at an eikaiwa very briefly.
That's an English teaching school for anyone not familiar with the term.
English conversation school, like.
Correct. Yeah.
After I graduated, when I thought I was going to leave, I was trying to find a job, but it was like I graduated right when COVID started, so there was not really many options for me.
Yeah, that's tough.
And I told myself I would never become an English teacher. Lo and behold, I became an English teacher.
Hey, man, a lot of people do it, and a lot of people enjoy it. You know, it's not for everybody, but it is definitely one of those jobs out there that is perhaps a little bit easier to get than others. If you're
very
a native English speaker.
Yeah. And there's so many different types of English teaching jobs you can get.
Absolutely.
And I did it for about 2 years, and the only reason I did that one is because it was easiest job I've ever done in my life.
So it wasn't very interesting for you, wasn't it?
No, I wouldn't say that. I loved doing that because I was teaching little kids. It was very rewarding emotionally, you know? It was very fun to hang out with the kids all the time, ages from 3 to 15. Very wide range of kids, and it was really interesting to see the development of kids within Japan and how kind of they are. Kind of develop my own perspectives on kind of how the Japanese education system is, but that's a different topic.
Yeah, we can go into that a different day, perhaps.
Yeah. Which I think there's good things and bad things about it. But anyways, yeah, so I did the English teaching job. It paid well. I was working like 20 hours a week, you know? It was the easiest job ever.
It's strange. I kind of have a similar view as you on English teaching. It's pretty good for what it is. However, my major issue with it is that the ceiling is very low. So like even if you love it, and I've done the same thing, taught English here and there off and on, and it's really fun, it's really rewarding. But if you want to make it into a career, you either got to start your own school or like
there's no upward mobility from there, you know, like what you get is what you get, and there's nothing past that, you know?
Yeah. So you start kind of in the middle, but you never go beyond that, unfortunately. Yeah. So, okay, what did you move on to after that?
Yeah, so after that, same thing you were just saying, you know, like I realized that, okay, I was enjoying my life, you know, I had a lot of free time, I was making decent money and these kinds of things, but I realized there was no upward mobility, and there was nothing, no real life experience I was gaining from this, so I was trying to look for something, but like I said, my Japanese language is not as great as I would like it to be. So I became the thing that I also said I would not become. I became a recruiter.
Hey, you know what? It's another job. That was a job that I've been very interested in, and I know a few folks who do it. Some people really love it, and some people are not so hot on it. Like, what has your experience in recruiting been?
I think it's a good job to have, and there's a lot of opportunities with it. It's a great job because any work that you put into it, you can receive a monetary benefit based off of your hard work, you know? At the same time, it is a stressful job, and you do have to put a lot of work into it, especially when you're just starting off and you don't have a network of people that you know. It's all about finding jobs for people, right? And it's about finding jobs for those people. You're always moving, you're always hunting, you're always kind of doing this and that, and it's
a lot of hustle.
It's a lot of hustle, you know. And it's a great job, you know. I've honestly I like the company that I work with. I love the people that I work with. You know, I love the opportunity to make the money, but just probably not a thing that I see myself doing for more than a few years. You know, I think it's a great job to have, but you have to realize, is this something you want to do long term or not? You know.
On that note, what are your goals for the future? Like, what do you see yourself doing if you're going to make a job change? We spoke at the beginning of the podcast talking about the other projects you've worked on. You hinted, right? You're on hiatus. You haven't retired. Something's coming down the pipeline. Job, passions. What do you see yourself doing in the next couple of years?
Yeah, like I said, you know, I think I'll probably stay in this job for another few years, try to make some money, try to, like, you know, have something stable. And of course, I'm on a working visa, so I have to have a job.
Of course, yeah.
But if I get the chance to have a permanent residence visa or a spousal visa, then I'll probably, and I have enough money to be comfortable, then I'll probably use that time and savings that I have to focus my energy into something that's more in my kind of line of my vision. And I think what's in my vision is kind of, I like talking to people. You know, you're doing this podcast because you like talking to people. I wouldn't say that I'm retired from doing podcasting, but I'm definitely on hiatus. I would say my other two previous podcasts are definitely retired, but I think I want to do something else like this again. I want to bring people onto the podcast, and I want to speak to them and have their perspectives. My ideas are coming along. You know, I'm trying to see what I can do and what can I talk about. And what I mentioned earlier is Islam is the fastest growing religion in Japan. I think I want to do a podcast about Muslims in Japan, but I think now I have because I did the podcast in the past, I have a better idea as to what I want to do. Talking with Muslims in Japan. And you know, actually, Japan is very strict about who they allow into Japan. Usually the only people the foreigners they allow are people coming from quote-unquote good countries, or
whatever that means.
Yeah. Or people who have university degrees, or...
This is a big one.
Yeah.
For certain. Yeah.
Or people who have long experience within a very dedicated field, like very desired field within Japan, like technology or something like that. Those are basically the only things. They also have like visas for healthcare workers or men who want to work in construction, these kinds of things. You see, but these are very only temporary visas, right?
There's a bottleneck for sure in terms of what you can do.
Exactly.
But yeah. Okay.
So what the people that they allow into Japan are usually people who have interesting backgrounds, I suppose. People who are more generally more educated. And so because of that, I think we will find that the Muslims who do come here, they have interesting stories to tell. So if I can hone in on that and get these stories and understanding of people, I think that's something that I would be really interested in.
Well, I think that's an excellent project, and we'll be looking forward to it when it comes out.
Inshallah.
And, you know, that's also, I think, a nice place to wrap up for today. We had a really great conversation. I'm glad that you and I were able to
We talked about echo chambers earlier on, and I feel like some of the things that you said have echoed some of the things that I've said in the past, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. I would say that that is a reaffirming theories or ideas that we have, and I would love to continue the conversation with you somewhere else down the line, but it was a pleasure. Thanks again, Ramsey, and yeah, have a good one.
Thanks, bro. Thanks for inviting me on the show. It was a real pleasure, and thanks for creating this format. It's really cool.
Absolutely.
Thank you for watching all the way to the end. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give the video a like and consider subscribing. Ramsey hasn't started his new podcast yet about being Muslim in Japan, so in the meantime, please check out his previous podcast, Baroquios. As always, links are in the description. That'll do it for today. Thanks again, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Expat Lens.